we're going to look at ways to nurture your own creativity, to create spaces, places, times that encourage you to be more creative. First of all, we are going to talk about environments, both physical environments and temporal environments. So first of all, the culture of an organisation. Actually, there's been an enormous amount written about the way organisations can be better suited to be innovative, to be creative. So I'm just going to give you a little taste of this now, but there's a lot you could learn about this. One of the most crucial things is about organisations which are forgiving of failure. Now, towards the beginning of this video series about creativity, I talked about bad ideas. And one of the things about bad ideas is you can afford to have a bad idea because that's what it's there for. But in a lot of our work, when something fails, we think something's gone badly wrong. But often failure is a point to learn. Why did it fail? What could happen next time? Or even to actually look at that failure and say, maybe there's something in what went wrong that's actually good. If you never fail, you probably never do anything that's really brilliant, really exciting. Every good expedition has risk associated with it. Risk means it can go wrong. And if things can't go wrong, they probably can't go very right. Often it's important though to try and fail as quickly as possible. So there's an interesting tension here. And this is obviously a part of the way design processes work. You often try and produce a lot of ideas early on, knowing that you're going to have to filter through them to find the ones that you actually want to continue. What you don't want to do is have the failure being there when the product is delivered. So there's a bit of tension between being very forgiving of failure, being able to do things which are a little bit risky and may not work, and yet also to be able to keep an eye on that, to be able to manage that process and to look out for the times when things perhaps ought to be put aside, not necessarily forgotten entirely. Now, I'm going to remind you about that story right at the beginning about post-it notes. There's the guy who invented post-it notes, or rather, the guy who failed to invent the glue, tried to make a glue that wasn't sticky enough. A failure. Didn't try and pretend that it was working, to try and sell it as glue that worked. Knew there was something about it, and effectively filed it, but knew it was something to look at again. And that's quite an important lesson. He knew it hadn't done what he wanted to do, so he knew it wasn't working, but also hadn't entirely forgotten about it. Now also think about what then happened later in that story. He went around telling people in the organisation. Now I might just think about this. He was telling people about the thing that went wrong, which is, well, actually that sounds a bit daunting, doesn't it? Why would you tell people about your failures? It was because he had this feeling that that glue would be useful for something. Now this gets back to this second cultural issue. Cultures that encourage sharing are more likely to be creative cultures. In order to do that, you have to have a level of trust of your colleagues, the ability to share things, to believe that in doing so you're not sort of giving away your crown jewels of your idea. For certain things, when you give something away, you've got less yourself. But actually with ideas, an idea shared is an idea multiplied. There's more idea often when you've shared it and bounced it off somebody than when you hold it in yourself. But organisations have to create the culture where people trust each other, where there is attribution, reward given to everybody who's involved in that process. The original concept to the person who develops it and turns it into something that's actually useful. In order to have those sharings, often you need to try and create the places where that sharing can happen. And by place, I'll use it in a very broad sense, both physical places, but also times. So sometimes it's a physical place. You've all heard about the water cooler effect. People go, they gather, whether it's a water cooler, whether it's the place where you have your kettle or your coffee machine. People gather there. You get those unplanned conversations where suddenly something comes into somebody's head through that connection. So what you need to do is plan for the unplanned, which is a bit of oxymoron, but actually can happen. There are techniques to help you do this. Space syntax is something that was developed by the Bartlett School of Architecture, and is a way of looking at a space and actually trying to work out where are the potential places where people are likely to have this sort of chance meeting. Often it's at the junction of viewpoints. It's where perhaps multiple corridors meet or something like that. Or it might be perhaps that there's windows that look out onto a central area that you can all see as things are going on. So you can try and plan to create physical spaces that encourage those. Sometimes it might be more about creating special times in those places. That might be away days. You've often had this you've probably been involved in it where you go off-site somewhere, or maybe even within your organisation but to a different part of the building. You're shutting yourself off from telephone calls and interruptions, but also by going into a different space together, you are able to discuss things in a different way. You feel differently about that place. Maybe you might have meeting-free days. You might deliberately say every Wednesday there are no meetings. Ways to create space where people can both have freedom to think themselves but also to meet with others. Now, as you saw, that crossed over between the physical environment and the time, and the means of sharing in the physical environment. Physical environment also, we know, is important individually. So it's actually gone down again. The wind was quite loud here because I'm sitting in a room that's just opposite the sea. I quite like to be able to look out and see those open environments. Other people prefer something that's more of blank white walls. Often poets, novelists have had places to go to. There's a picture here of Dylan Thomas's boathouse where he wrote a lot of his poetry. George Orwell, I've got a copy here of 1984. He wrote 1984 on this little I think it wasn't a little cottage, actually it might have been quite a big house at the very northern tip of Jura, which is about as far as civilization as you can get, away from civilization, that you can get in the United Kingdom. Way off on this little Scottish island at the end of nowhere. And that was where he found space, even though he was actually ailing in his health at that point, to actually write. And write what has become a seminal work of fiction. In a design studio, you might also have things like mood boards, designing around, putting photographs, whether that's coming from your participants and your subjects or from just things that you have inspiration to think about. If you come across cultural probes, this is when you give people these little packs that have things like postcards to write in or photographs to take, where your subjects, your end users have created things. You can then put those in your environment, ways of making your environment one that sparks creativity, sparks thoughts for you. Crucially also is getting into users' real context. Again, this is a way, it's important for eliciting knowledge, but important also for understanding and getting that rich sense that enables you to be able to think of things that are original and yet suited. Actually, right at the very beginning of my career in understanding user interfaces and human-computer interactions, I worked at a local government for the sort of IT or computing department. One of my earliest jobs was to create a printout, an annual printout, or to update an annual printout for the pensions department. And I met with the head of the pensions department. We talked about how this printout, which was basically one line on the line printer listing per pensioner at the end of the year, what this man wanted in it. So he was the head of the department. We talked together in my office for about an hour. And several times I asked him how he used the printout, and I never felt I really understood what it was used for. Later on, I produced a first example, so I had my listing that had come off, and I said, this is old green and white lined paper. This is very, very old stuff. Anyway, I rang him up and said, it's come off the printer. And he said, oh, I'll come to your office. And I said, oh, why don't I go to you? So I went to his office where there was other people working, a few clerical people who did work for him. And I said, at that stage, I said, what do you do with this listing? And then he said, oh, And he went to a filing cabinet, he brought out these little 5x3 paper cards. He said, well, we take this number from here and this number from here and we put it there. And I said, oh, would you like me to add those two numbers together? And he said, oh, can you do that? In my office, he wasn't able to see the potential of the technology, and we're talking simple technology, but even that, I wasn't able to understand the nature of his problem well enough. When we were in his environment, in the real environment where the real work happened, suddenly we were able to see the better solution that meant he actually had something that fitted his uses much better than anything we got from our more abstract discussions.